Well, Al, thanks very much. No, I'm slightly ashamed that my expedition in 2006 was sponsored by Fortnum& Masons. I'm sorry, Nick, but we were given our food. We had to eat. Anyway, my expedition was to ascend the Nile from the sea, the Mediterranean, the whole way to its longest source in Rwanda, a distance of 4,100 miles. We were doing the power of the river was immense, so we did it in 3 Zapcats. That's not one of these. That's one of the rafts from Cam Maclay who came with me. I couldn't find anyone English who was mad enough to come and do it with us, so I ended up with 2 New Zealanders, Cam Maclay and Garth McIntyre. There were 3 Macs doing it. We ascended the Nile through 5 countries: Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, Tanzania, finally ending up in Rwanda. You can see here with us with 44-gallon drums of fuel as extra load because the distances were immense. Now, everything was going reasonably swimmingly well as we entered southern Sudan and the largest swamp in the world, which is the size of France, before we ended up entering northern Uganda. You can see here how we actually camped. The whole area was covered in water, and the camping arrangement I set up was on top. We entered northern Uganda at this point, and the Murchison Falls National Park, you'll know about, presented the first problems. At this point here, we had to arrange for some sort of system to lift our vehicles and tracks up over the falls themselves. We were constantly covered in water, and as you can see, foot rot set in. There was no time to put your feet up. I'm not sure if Fortnum & Masons will appreciate that photo. Eventually, we got to the Murchison Falls National Park, and the fun really started to test us. Here you can see this is at the very base. I'm not sure very many people have actually seen that. I devised a system called a flying inflatable boat, which was actually an Italian-made contraption to lift us up over the falls. I used the power of the river as a runway, but of course there's no such thing as a clear runway. It's full of rocks, crocodiles, and hippos. This I used to great extent as we moved up the falls. I did 16 flights over the Murchison Falls themselves. I don't think anyone's ever done that before. And eventually we had a film camera crew with us whose porters ate all our food. So we became incredibly hungry. And at this point we did actually revert to normal the nature and took leave of our senses and ate some mushrooms. They turned out to be something from the Amanita family, or the angel of death, and we ended up with fluid coming out the front and the back end at the same rate. I was tasked to go back down to where we'd left them and email them back to the poisons unit at Kew Gardens for a positive identification. We were given the all clear. The next day we then rose up through the rapids here, and with the power of the water here, Cam Maclay turned the boat over. You had to get out of the water as quick as possible before the crocodiles that are waiting for you at the bottom get you. And it was this point that I flew this flying inflatable boat while I was looking for them, because they completely disappeared, and I flew it into a tree. This was the result of that. I ended up burnt. It was upside down. This photograph was taken after that, and I'd broken my leg. At this point, Cam Maclay called for some help, for a land-based support to come in and collect us. And we then started traveling around the next set of rapids through some very high, long elephant grass. And at this point, a black Ugandan rebel from the LRA, as it turned out, the Lord's Resistance Army, raised a gun and started shooting at us. It was very clear from the amount of automatic weapon fire that was coming into us that we were in serious trouble. And we had to get out of the car because it crashed and run for our lives. I took one step out of the Land Rover and collapsed on the ground. And was very quickly found by these rebels, who took me back to the Land Rover and asked me for guns, which we didn't have any, satellite phones, money, and he then started tugging at my shorts. I'd already given him my shirt, so that was not looking good. He then proceeded to stuff the Land Rover full of grass and made me kneel down in front of the Land Rover, or by the driver's door, and in front of me stuffed a handful of grass into the Land Rover and lit it. Eventually we were rescued by the Ugandan army. And this was a photograph as we left. After about 3 or 4 months, of course, I suspended the operation for us all to recover from our various injuries. We ended up devising a system to lift ourselves up the remaining rapids. Of course, the fib was smashed up. And this is how we did it. We then ended up at Ginger, or Lake Victoria, where the Victorian source of the Nile is. In 1862, Dr. Speke, John Speke, stated that was where the source of the Nile was. Well, we all know that that's now not the case. On across Lake Victoria, we did our own bit of fishing, and eat your heart out, Robson Roads, that our fish was bigger than yours. We then ended up going into Tanzania and further up into the mountains of Rwanda. The river turned much more nasty, brown, and the weather got cold. You can see here, these are the sort of rapids that we were having to deal with. Finally, we got to the point where we'd actually run out of water. And so it was about 100 kilometers to the finish. This is up in the mountains in Rwanda, and we had to walk to the longest source. And it was at that point that the jungle was unbelievably thick. It took us about 7 days to do 100 kilometers. We were doing about 200 meters. We were down to about 200 meters in an hour, and making very poor progress. And eventually, on the 30th of March 2006, we finished. It was reported in the press on the 1st of April, and of course everyone thought it was a hoax. We'd found the new longest source of the Nile. We'd measured the river electronically using GPS and found it to be 66 miles longer than previously thought. Now, looking towards the future, later on this year, we're going to go to, I'm planning an expedition to go to Rockall, the rock right out in the Atlantic coast. You can see where it is, halfway between Scotland and Iceland. More people have landed on the moon than have landed on Rockall. Actually, that's not quite true. A few more have. But it's certainly difficult to land, and it's going to be even more difficult to sleep on, which we're planning to do, weather permitting. And then finally, the other thing I'm planning is a round-the-world trip, and I'm going to actually physically fly this boat. You can see the water levels right at the bottom where the delta wing will be, and it rises, hopefully, out of the water, and we'll be able to keep a constant pace to succeed. We want to do it in 40 days, or I want to do it in 40 days. Their existing record is 61. Thanks very much. That's all I've got to say.